Demacia was not built on a dream. Demacia was built on a lie. All those noble ideals and promises of a brighter future, they were never meant for the likes of us. We have been stripped of our freedom, our dignity, our very lives. I say no more. Mages of Demacia, the day has come. It's time we fight back.
Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, mageseekers and Minutemen. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about something a little different. This video was just going to be about Zarina and how much of an improvement on the revolutionary formula she was over Nia, but I wanted to try and push the boat out a little bit to see how multimedia analysis went down on the channel. Rather than exploring a theme in Dead by Daylight, I've decided to use Dead by Daylight to explore a theme. The Revolutionary is a reasonably popular character archetype defined by active opposition to, and a struggle against, a status quo. Fundamentally, that's all there is to it. They could be rebelling against a totalitarian regime, a fair democracy, a social hierarchy, anything that has ensconced itself as the establishment. There's good revolutionaries, there's bad revolutionaries, but most are a bit of both. And today I'll be taking a look at what separates a well-written revolutionary from an unconvincing one. After hours of labour in the Pixel Bush Law Research Centre, I have distilled 3 traits that define a truly excellent revolutionary character. I call it the 3 S's. The character's status in the hierarchy that drives revolutionary action, the stakes that make revolutionary action necessary, and the moral standards upheld by the Revolutionary Party that are pulled into question by the end. Let's start with the character's status, the social background that they have that pushes them towards acts of unrest and revolution.
Tonight, a comedian died in New York.
Often, the best way to establish a revolutionary character is to set them up as someone who naturally goes against the regular grain of society, someone for whom the conventional way of life doesn't work. If they've been oppressed and marginalised by the powers that be for their entire life, it only makes sense to imagine them spending their life trying to upset the established order that oppresses them and their comrades. While it is possible to tell a story where the revolutionary character starts off in a position of privilege and renounces that privilege to fight for the needs of others, such a story must be told with extreme care. If you're not cautious, you could very easily create a white saviour narrative, where the marginalised group being oppressed has no agency, and needs to wait patiently for the heroic white guy to take pity on them and save the day. This was a mistake made by movies such as Avatar and Pocahontas that have not aged well at all. As a result, it's usually a good idea to put your revolutionary character in the role of the marginalised and oppressed from the get-go, especially if they're the only character in the story who gets major focus and development, since it leaves their position in the social hierarchy beyond any doubt and dodges the white saviour narrative. Here's where we begin with Dead by Daylight's own Zarina Kassir. Her backstory is extensive, and really does illuminate why she does what she does. For those who don't know, Zarina was the child of a Lebanese family living in Brooklyn. People of Lebanese descent make up 0.79% of the US's 328 million people, and even in the highly diverse borough of Brooklyn, she found difficulties coming to terms with her dual identity as both Lebanese and American. She tried to erase her own cultural heritage and its impact on her by dyeing her hair and changing her name. She was imitating what was popular and ordinary because she felt it was worth it to fit in. However, as she grew up, she realised that hiding who she was to avoid harassment and bullying wasn't worth it, and in doing so, committed her first act of rebellion. For Zarina, being herself was contrary to the established order her life had been set upon, so Zarina embracing her own heritage at the cost of appearing normal was revolutionary. It would be very easy to tell a coming-of-age style story about how Zarina learned to love herself, and that she was overthinking how society would react to her living her life as herself. in a story devoid of any political or social commentary. Zarina's primary obstacle would be internal rather than external. She wouldn't need to fear embracing her true identity, because society would still love her for who she was. But that wasn't the reality of her situation. Society did alienate her for embracing who she was. She had to work hard to earn her following online. When she exposed the diner exploiting its workers by not paying them properly, she wasn't celebrated for unearthing the truth. The media that picked up her film span it as sympathetic for the restaurant somehow. And that's when Zarina learned a difficult lesson. Rocking the boat is one thing, but actually getting change done by upsetting the established order is quite a lot more challenging. And nowhere is that difficult long-term struggle for justice clearer than the aftermath of what happened to her father. He was pushed into oncoming traffic by one Clark Stevenson, a gang member who she later discovered had pre-planned the attack on him. He wasn't picked out at random. Zarina's father was targeted. He'd been singled out and killed by a violent gang, and the authorities missed it. By denying the official version of events and standing out from the crowd, Zarina discovered the truth and showed it to the world. It can't have been easy for her, devoting so much time to the circumstances surrounding her father's death, and even interviewing the man who killed him to try to press him for a confession. Can you imagine trying to get in the head of someone who'd killed your father, trying to maintain your composure and control of the situation? I can't even begin to imagine how hard that must have been for her. And it's a testament to her desire to see justice done and ensure her father's death was fully understood, that she had the force of will to see it through. That status in society that she had lived with her whole life naturally led her down a path to revolutionary acts of justice. She's not throwing bombs or beating up the police or anything so decisive, but she's openly resisting unjust behaviour even when it is done by people in power. By illicitly recording businesses cheating their workers, Zarina disregards authority again and again to do what's right for the people without a voice. Sadly for her, Zarina was scooped from the floor of Caleb Quinn's cell in Hellshire Penitentiary into the realms of the Entity before she was able to continue her work. So we didn't get to see her really hit her stride and start taking on bigger and bigger opposition. But we do see her hard-headed and principled ideologies seeping through into her struggles against the Entity's killers. Even now, in a world of pain and nightmares unlike anything she could have imagined, her fight against those with all the power persists. Zarina's status as a marginalised young woman, pressured to fit in by society, is a natural birthplace for the mindset of a revolutionary. In order to embrace who she was from a young age, she had to go against the grain and risk mistreatment and alienation from her peers simply to be herself. She has had to earn every scrap of respect she's got through her hard work and uncompromising dedication to finding out the truth. Behaviour has her set up from day one to be Dead by Daylight's firebrand revolutionary, and I can't wait to see what revelations a future Zarina Tome story could bring.
None of you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me!
Okay, so your revolutionary has a background deeply rooted in oppression and discontent with the status quo. To live their life freely, acts of revolution are inevitable. But there's a key ingredient required to cook up a revolution. Something truly worth fighting to stop. The stakes. To make the revolution worth having, there needs to be a good reason to do it, and to do it now. There needs to be an immediate obstacle that must be overcome. And the more extreme the revolutionary's methods are, the more extreme the regime they fight must be. A high-quality exploration of extreme measures, being ultimately justified by extreme stakes, is League of Legends' own Sylas of Demacia. Sylas is a mage in the kingdom of Demacia that was literally born out of hatred of mages, and zealously persecutes those born with magic in their blood for the crime of existing. Since narrowly escaping his own execution, Sylas has led insurrections against the throne with the goal of toppling the Demacian aristocracy by any means necessary. And he's completely justified in doing so. When he was a child, his family gave him up to the government mageseekers as soon as he started to display magical power. Normally, mages in the kingdom were locked up and put through torturous procedures to try to remove their magic. This was most commonly done by forcing them to drink a potion full of petricite. This was a mineral that absorbed magic, so the potion would painfully drain the drinker's magic through their body into the petricite. Sylas, however, could see the latent magic in others as part of his magical power, so the mageseekers used him as a sniffer dog to find other mages hiding in plain sight for incarceration and treatment. One thing Sylas discovered during his time with the mageseekers was that while any common people found to be mages were immediately and harshly dealt with, those with power and influence he found to be hiding magical power were untouchable. The rich and powerful could get away with harbouring magic, while the poor and powerless could not. When a teenaged Sylas and his mageseeker handlers had been assigned to take in a young girl who was displaying magical powers, Sylas made a big mistake. He tried to take the girl's hand, to reassure her he wasn't there to hurt her, that she was going to be okay. She wasn't. Sylas accidentally drained the magic from her body and unleashed it in an inferno of magical power, killing his mageseeker handlers and the little girl. Before long, Demacia was whispering stories of Sylas the murderous mage, and the king's advisor, Tiana Crownguard, saw him sentenced to life imprisonment in the mageseeker's compound. 15 years, Sylas rotted in prison, fitted with petricite shackles to hold back his magical power, while the mageseekers ran rampant across Demacia, trying to destroy all mages unfortunate enough to have been born within the kingdom. There's a word for that, for trying to exterminate or imprison a whole bloodline of people, based on prejudice, using the infrastructure of a government. What is it? Oh! Genocide. According to Article 2 of the United Nations Genocide Convention that met in Rome in 1948, any one or more of these actions against a particular ethnic, racial, religious or national group constitutes a genocide. Killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. The mageseekers and the government that props them up are absolutely guilty of committing genocide against the mage population by that metric, and here is where Sylas's stakes come from. Genocide is one of the worst crimes that can be committed, and almost any action taken to prevent a genocide is justified simply because it is preventing a genocide. Sylas isn't a perfect person, and he's done a lot of morally questionable stuff as part of his revolution. He manipulated the young mage Luxana Crownguard to allow him to escape his execution, and killed almost everyone who attended it. He almost forced the Crown Prince Jarvan IV to eat live rats in front of a baying crowd before his execution like he was forced to eat rats in prison, and he's absolutely set on burning the whole kingdom to the ground. That's what he has to do to secure his people's freedom. But honestly, given the context, Sylas's actions are almost entirely justified. He had to manipulate Lux and borrow her power to escape his execution, because otherwise, well, he gets unjustly executed. Lux could have used it herself to break him out, but she chose not to, so she could preserve her position and hide her magic. So he took matters into his own hands. He killed almost everybody at the execution because, well, what else was he supposed to do? The people he killed were government officials and prison guards, who would absolutely have killed him on the spot just for being born a mage. If he'd spared them, he'd basically be signing his own death warrant.
If I'd still been standing there, it'd take my head off, you madman.
Demacia!
That's punishable by death, is it?
The same goes for his goal of completely dismantling Demacia and rebuilding it from the ground up. The kingdom was born out of the remains of the Rune Wars, where people feared and hated mages. An anti-magic sentiment forms one of the major backbones of the nation. The very existence of Demacia in its current state is hostile to mages. So in order for it to be a safe place for a mage to live or be born, it must be fundamentally changed. And this change isn't possible through peaceful means. Ask King Jarvan III, implied to have been killed by insiders in his own government for offering to negotiate with Sylas and ordering the disbanding of the Mageseeker Order. The narrative in Demacia is that Sylas and his army of revolutionaries killed King Jarvan, but the Lux comics reveal that that didn't happen, although the Demacian authorities find that narrative to be very convenient in rallying anti-magic sentiment. The Demacian government is a genocidal absolute monarchy propped up by a police state, prepared to commit regicide before being willing to stop persecuting people for the way they were born. Sylas' stakes are clear and simple. Overthrow the government by any means necessary to save the lives of his comrades. In fact, his stakes are so good that Riot's narrative team has written themselves into a corner. Sylas was designed to be the villain of the Demacia storyline, but they made Demacia too cruel, too monstrous to be worth defending. Sylas did some morally dubious things, but he did them to put a stop to Demacia's tyranny over mages, and everyone who stood in his way was directly allowing that tyranny. Ironically, they made the stakes of revolution too high. Sylas is too justified in his actions to properly fulfill the role in the story that Riot has penned out for him. That the solution to the oppression of mages is incremental peaceful change, the kind of change that Lux espouses. But King Jarvan tried that, and the system killed him for it. Hell, the only reason Sylas eventually lost in the Lux comic is because he was too compassionate. Lux begged him to let her brother Garen live, after Garen had tried to kill Sylas, by the way, and Sylas granting her that wish actually cost him his victory, as Garen went on to save Prince Jarvan from his execution and drove Sylas back outside of the capital city after Lux approached him as a friend before shooting him with a crossbow. But yeah, sure, she's the protagonist here. Sylas of Dragonborn is a masterclass in writing a revolutionary character with a clear and justified goal, almost too well written for his own good. In the Lux comics, where he serves as the antagonist, he absolutely stole the show, with every major event in the plot being driven by his actions to topple the hierarchy, while the eponymous Lux does very little on her own. He's written so well that when Riot tried to paint him as a villain of his story instead of the hero or anti-hero, it didn't really stick. And as a result, the direction his character will take in the future is still in question. Riot might backtrack on Sylas being the villain of Demacia and realise what he's doing is ultimately right. Or they might double down and make him a cartoonishly evil shadow of the character he is today. Fingers crossed, they make the right decision. They won't.
Never compromise. Not even in the face of Armageddon.
Now, our ideal revolutionary has the status that makes anti-establishment behaviour not just natural, but necessary, as well as the stakes to lend urgency to their actions and justify why the system they fight against must be toppled. They have the beginning of their story as a victim of the system, and the middle of it as a struggle against their oppression. But, like all good stories, a story of revolution must have an ending. And since a revolution is inherently an exercise of one's moral standards, it makes sense for an ending to a revolutionary story to involve a reevaluation of those moral standards. In short, whether the ending achieved justifies the means used to achieve it. There are few more powerful revolutionary endings in fiction than the hit graphic novel and subsequent film adaptation of Watchmen. The stories of Zarina and Sylas are both ongoing. Their nature as parts of ever-expanding video games leave the moral resolution of their actions still up in the air. But the story of Watchmen is told. It has had its moral resolution. And that resolution comes in the form of its most iconic character, the mentally unstable and utterly merciless vigilante known as Rorschach. As beloved and iconic as Rorschach is, I would argue Watchmen is not his story. I could go on for hours about why Laurie is the central character of the whole story, whose decisions and development drive the plot, but you're not here for that. Rorschach is not the main character because he does not develop. The story does not change him. And I think that's why so many people, myself included, find him so compelling. In a world where every other character rejects the idea of consistent morality, in favour of either mathematical pragmatism or thoughtless impulse, Rorschach is defined by his inseparable attachment to morality. That in itself is an act of rebellion. When the US government lays down the law and ceases vigilante behaviour, most of the remaining vigilantes comply and return to civilian life. What does Rorschach do? He leaves the corpse of a serial rapist outside a police station with a message. Never! Rorschach, born with the name Walter Kovacs, has many flaws. He is deeply misogynistic. He's a right-wing reactionary to the point that he might be sipping the QAnon Kool-Aid if he was around in 2021. And his black and white view of morality results in him treating a lot of people with more brutality than they deserve. That morality that leads him to acts of extreme violence manifests as standards he would seem to hold the world to. These standards are known broadly as a Madonna whore complex. A man with such a complex views women either as saintly Madonnas to be saved, or debased whores to be rejected. This sums up Rorschach's standards very well. If you do not pass his purity test, you are filthy and sinful, and not worth saving. He sees everything and everyone in black and white. Madonna whore complexes are not uncommon in fiction, but in most cases, such as The Hunchback of Notre Dame's Claude Frollo, or A Song of Ice and Fire's Tywin Lannister, the man in question is a hypocrite who attempts to champion the moral high ground despite falling for the same temptations he publicly despises. There is nothing revolutionary about that because it is insincere. Their opposition to what they claim to be a corrupt way of life is paper-thin and devoid of principle. Walter Kovacs works as a revolutionary because he actually holds himself to his exacting standards, even at great personal cost. No matter his rampant character flaws, you kinda have to respect someone who's that dedicated to bringing justice to an unjust world. Just as he would not allow the criminals he killed the luxury of second chances, he does not allow himself the luxury of rest, dignity, or surrender. To do so would be a betrayal of his moral standards. And nowhere is that clearer than at the climax, when Adrian Veidt's plan has succeeded and the world is at peace from the brink of nuclear apocalypse. In a move quite uncharacteristic for a superhero story, the heroes talk it out with the villain, and realise that the best move is actually to go along with his plan, to keep silent, so that the fragile peace Veidt has bought with the lives of millions of people can be maintained. In short, a new establishment of lies is formed to protect this peace, and both the villain and all our erstwhile heroes are complicit in it. All except Rorschach. To him, the idea of compromising with Veidt and allowing him to get away with the damage he's done, to escape the justice he spent his life fighting for, is unthinkable, even when nuclear war is at stake. So he makes a decision, right there and right then, to march across the Antarctic ice in his long coat and fedora, and tell the world what Veidt did. He does this in spite of knowing both that spilling the beans would likely ignite nuclear war, but also knowing that by trying to leave, he's effectively signing his own death warrant, at the hands of the weather, or Dr. Manhattan, ensuring he doesn't blow the whistle. And he does it anyway, without an iota of fear, because he will not be complicit in a lie. All he has to say is, do it. He bellows at Dr. Manhattan to kill him because he believes death is better than injustice, that he'd sooner die a hero than live to see himself become the villain. Not even in the face of Armageddon. Never compromise. There is no more plain and actor revolution. At this moment, everything, the Antarctic weather, the fate of the world, the will of a god itself is pushed against him. But Rorschach refuses to be swayed, because he will defend his principles and standards to the bitter end. And as Dr. Manhattan destroys his body in an instant, we see the meaning of Walter's revolution in the grand scheme of things. From an amoral perspective, he just died needlessly. He didn't have to face his death if he just agreed to keep the plan a secret. But what means nothing to Dr. Manhattan or Adrian Veidt meant the world to Rorschach. He fought the fight that no one else was brave enough to do, with no hope of success, simply because it was right. And for that, he paid the ultimate price. Except, like all good revolutionaries, he doesn't let himself die, without ensuring his goals can still be completed. By leaving his journal in the hands of the New Frontiers and paper, he keeps the flaming rebellion against Vite's scheme burning, ready to ignite the powder keg that is this new world and burn it down in the name of the truth. I don't think we're supposed to agree with Rorschach, but we are supposed to understand him, and I think I do. I see him as the only true revolutionary possible in a world painted entirely in moral greys. Someone so deeply flawed and so strongly principled to live a life in black and white. The revolutionary is a difficult character archetype to master, and almost no piece of media fully does it justice. But hopefully this video has helped you to identify a good one when you see them, or maybe even write your own. I know this is quite a bit different from my normal Dead by Daylight content. Don't worry, some more traditional stuff is coming in the near future. But until then, if you did like my little multimedia analysis experiment, then please do let me know in the comments. I read them constantly and I do value your feedback. If you want to hear more from me, then by all means subscribe, maybe even join the Discord server that I set up. A link to my Discord, my Twitch stream and my Twitter are all in the description, so check them out if you want to. We're live every Wednesday from 7:30 GMT. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to a poll I have put up in the community tab on my channel. 10,000 subscribers probably isn't a million miles away at this point, so I wanted to push the question out here now. What do you want me to do to celebrate 10k? I've got a list of options in the poll right now, so if you want to go and vote and let me know what other ideas you might have in the description of that poll, then please go and do that. The link's in the description, please go check it out. That's all from me, friends, so farewell and have a good one.